Hello, I'm Isaac Keith Martinez, and welcome to Isaac's Haunted Bed. Today we're going to talk about films that I wish had no sequel. Now, before I get into them and explain why I wish I had no sequel, I'd like to say that although I wish these movies had no sequel, I actually do enjoy the franchises that all of these movies do have. That doesn't necessarily mean I like all the movies. In fact, all of them probably have a movie or two that I don't like, but they all have contributed movies that I do like. In fact, movies that I love. Now, the reason why I wish these movies had no sequel is because I don't think sequels are necessary. I think that sequels are the product of success. I think that when a movie makes money, then the movie stops being art to the company that put it. In fact, I don't think the company that put it out ever thought of it as art. I think the filmmaker thought of it as art, and then the film company that put the movie out, they just think of it as like a brand or a product. It's something that they own the rights to that they can make money out of. So they say, oh, this is successful, let's make the sequels and rake in the cash. So then you get your part 2s and your part 3s and your part 4s, and as a fan, you have this fantasy that it's this epic saga, and hopefully when it's all done, there will be closure. Sometimes, maybe by accident, maybe by design, that happens, but usually it doesn't. Usually they just stop making these movies when they stop making money, and then they get canceled like a TV show. So, if you think of these films as art, the best case scenario is when you tell a perfect story, it can remain perfect if you stop telling the story. You don't go, the end. But wait, and then the next day, no, just stop. So picture this. Picture living in a world where these movies had no sequel. I am going to start with Scream. Wes Craven's Scream. This movie was very important when it came out in the late 90s. Two things happened when this movie came out. One is it brought attention back to horror. Horror was going through a dry spell during most of the early to mid 90s, and the success of Scream and a few other titles, but I think a lot of props should be given to Scream for bringing attention back to the genre. And secondly, it brought success back to Wes Craven, which is neat because Wes Craven had success in the 70s, he had success in the 80s, and then he was proven he could have success in the 90s. He was a significant horror filmmaker. Scream was great because it took something that we were very familiar with. In this case, I guess you could say a slasher film, but although it wasn't your typical slasher film because there was the mystery of like who is the killer, it's a mystery. I don't want to say it's not like a giallo because it doesn't have the conventions of one, but you know, like a giallo, it's like you have a killer, but you don't know who it is, and you've at least figured out that throughout the movie, of the characters that you've met so far, one of them is the killer. And then you just have to wonder who it is. And then of course, you start planting clues, and many of them are red herrings. You know, who you think's the killer is not the killer, and at the end, you're surprised. And Scream not only did this in a very smart way and a very entertaining way, but it also acknowledged the rules of horror films, and that was neat because horror films had never done that before, where you had a character that broke down all the traditions of a horror film, and then Scream goes out of its way to break the rules and traveled away from it. And it was just very smart and self-aware, and it had a great cast, and I think that when people talk about Scream now, I think people are kind of they're not all universally like, oh, it's so amazing. Some people are just like, oh, Scream. And like now it's like an MTV series also, which I admit I've never seen, so I really can't judge, but I don't think that really helps it. its legacy, that is. I think it just feels watered down. It was just go, Scream. But think about this. What if there was no Scream 2, Scream 3, Scream 4, or MTV series? What if it was just Scream? What if it was just that one smart, rule-breaking, late 90s film? I think it would be remembered as a classic. And if you never knew about those other movies, and you saw this movie, and then you stopped, and you didn't see part 2, part 3, part 4 of the series, I think that's the way it would live in your mind. Like, wow, that is a smart, sharp, cool horror film. So Scream. I wish there was no sequels to Scream. But I do kind of have fun with the rest of the Scream movies. Gosh, you're going to hate me for this one. You're going to hate me so much. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger is so beloved. He is the most popular 1980s horror film slasher icon. You could argue Jason or Michael Myers, but I think numbers don't lie. As far as success is concerned, box office, merchandise, I mean, the guy was all over the place. He's to the point where you see him on like MTV doing commercials and VJing, all this kind of stuff. Freddy Krueger is so popular, and I like the franchise. I don't like all the movies. I think some of them are kind of cheesy, and at the time I was younger, what I liked about those movies was that they were funny, and then I revisited them later as I got older, and I looked at them again, and they didn't seem so funny to me anymore. They just seemed tacky, and I didn't like them as much. I'd love to watch them again, like one more time, because I haven't. Nightmare on Elm Street's not a franchise where I've watched over and over, and I actually did that with like Friday the 13th. Jason and Friday the 13th, that's my favorite franchise, and those are the movies that I've watched over and over again. Nightmare on Elm Street, not as much. So I would like to revisit them, knowing what I know now, knowing that his one-liners that he gives before he kills, they're not funny, and I could just go into it going, okay, I accept it for what it is. It's fun, cheesy stuff. How would it perform now? The one Nightmare on Elm Street sequel that I have revisited semi-recently was Dream Warriors, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. And actually, that's my favorite Elm Street sequel, and that one's really fun, and it's really cool, and I'm not going to take anything away from that. But, do you remember the first time you've seen Nightmare on Elm Street? Are you old enough where the first time you saw Nightmare on Elm Street, no sequels existed? Like, the first time I saw this movie, it was just this movie, and it was scary. And I think that if you were to show this movie to someone who had never seen it before today, and they do, and they have it in them to get scared, I think this movie would successfully scare them. And I can't say the same thing about the rest of them, because the rest of the franchise, he becomes like a stand-up comedian. He starts saying these puns, and his dreams become almost like set pieces for him to say his joke. But this movie it captures, it's because it's called A Nightmare on Elm Street. Not a funny dream on Elm Street. It's a nightmare, and it feels like a nightmare, and it's nightmarish. And if there was no world where Freddy was a wacky slasher, I think this movie would have a different reputation with horror. I think it would be a very less mainstream popular film. I think it'd be much more culty, you know? And yeah, I'd be willing to give up all the dolls and action figures and silly little MTV memories and stuff like that, and cameos by Zsa Zsa Gabor and Dokken and Fat Boys music videos, just to have this one scary horror film, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Here's another one that you're gonna hate me for. Alien. I love Alien, and I actually love all the Alien movies. So it seems weird that I'm suggesting Alien. I think Aliens is a very fun, exciting action film. I actually like Alien 3. I know a lot of people don't. I do. I think it's great. I like Alien Resurrection. I think that one's cool. I like the Xenomorphs so much, and I just love being in that alien type world so much that I even enjoy watching Alien vs. Predator. Yeah, I know that's not a good movie in theory, but I don't know, if you're going to watch a movie where a guy's wearing a costume and you have to suspend your disbelief and believe that this is a real creature, then you like monster movies and you should get over yourself. But I understand why you wouldn't if you think about Ridley Scott's masterpiece, Alien, because it's terrifying. It's a science fiction movie that feels like a horror film. And it, to me, is a horror. Like it plays like a horror film because of, like, what qualifies it as a horror film versus what qualifies it as a science fiction movie. It's in outer space. It's on a spaceship. Science fiction. How does it make you feel? Scared. It's scarier than most horror films I've ever seen. And I think that when you leave the film, fear is what you're holding on to so much that you don't feel like you watched a science fiction film. Do you feel like you watched Star Wars? Do you feel like you watched, you know, Flash Gordon? No, you feel like you've watched a horror film, and it doesn't feel like you spent time with an alien. It feels like you've spent time with a terrifying monster. And I love the brand, I love the franchise, but none of them really recapture how scary that first movie is. And being a horror movie fan, horror movies that are scary are very special to me, and this one captures that. So I wish I lived in a world where this one scary outer space movie existed and there were no other movies that had, you know, catchphrases and big machine guns and stuff and big set pieces. I wish it was just this one culty, artistic, terrifying horror sci-fi masterpiece. Alien. In space, no one can hear you scream. Jaws. I don't think a lot of people are going to argue with me on Jaws. I kind of like the Jaws sequels, but the easiest way for me to like them is to just kind of remove them from Jaws Part 1 and just think of them as like separate killer shark movies, and just think of them as just tacky killer shark movies. I mean, by the time you get to Jaws 3 and Jaws Revenge, I mean, they're just so bad that if you have it in you to enjoy them, it's because you have the mindset that you're watching a bad movie on purpose. You're not watching art. You're not watching Jaws Part 1. You're watching crap, you know? And that's not what Jaws is. Jaws is one of the greatest films ever made, and it's scary. And just ask anyone who saw it, especially when it was newer, you know? A lot of people have their stories about how they didn't want to go to the beach anymore. And a lot of people are haunted by Jaws when they go to the beach and they're in the water. How long are you in that water before you think about Jaws? I do. I think about Jaws when I'm in the water. It's not like I'm thinking about even just sharks in general. Like, that word, Jaws, like, it pops up into your brain. Because you associate it with being horrified. This is a scary film, but it's not just a scary film. It's art. It's a Steven Spielberg film, and what's really beautiful about it is, like Ridley Scott's Alien, here's a master filmmaker, kind of like Stanley Kubrick did with The Shining, who takes a genre where other filmmakers don't treat it seriously, and they treat it seriously. They treat it like art. They treat it not like a movie, but like a film. Not like something that you're just going to eat your popcorn to, but something that you could something that film schools could study it and teach classes about it. It's just perfect in every single way, and it is really scary. And I'm sorry, if you're like, I don't think it's scary, well, then good for you. I'm not you. I'm speaking on behalf of me. I know a lot of people share this with me. And I think Jaws is magnificent. I think it's perfect. I think it's scary. And I do wish there was no sequels. Because, not that it tarnishes it, because nothing will make this not be wonderful and perfect. But, yeah, I wish there was no Jaws 2, or 3, or 4. Jaws. Or Jaws 19 in Back to the Future Part 2. That's the only one I wish there was. The hologram Jaws, that's the best sequel. The one that doesn't exist. And finally, The Exorcist. This is in my top 10 movies of all time. It's my favorite horror film of all time, and I think it's legit scary. But there are sequels. There's a film called The Exorcist 2, The Heretic. There's The Exorcist 3. And then there's 2 prequels. Dominion, a prequel to The Exorcist, and The Exorcist: The Beginning. Which is unusual, right? That there's 2 prequels. And there's also a television series. Now here's the thing. I like the Exorcist franchise. The recent television series was really, really good. I loved it. And Exorcist 3 in particular is the best of the sequels. But that one almost plays more like just like a cool crime thriller. It has its horror moments, but it doesn't really feel like a horror film throughout the entire movie. And then the prequels almost are just like curiosities, you know, it's like how can 2 people tell the same story? Almost the same but different. And then Exorcist 2 is one of the most hated sequels of all time, but for like a cheesy, late 70s kind of weird movie, it's kind of fun in its own guilty pleasure kind of a way. But I will disregard all of that. I wish all that didn't exist just so that I can have this one masterpiece, this one perfect, brilliant horror film. And why is Exorcist so good? I could go on and on why, but I think the #1 reason why is because everyone involved, from the filmmakers to the actors, treats the material seriously. No one in this movie treats this movie as though they're in a horror movie. They treat this movie as though they're in like a real drama, and it comes through on the screen in the performances, and it feels like it's all really happening. And if that was really happening, I can't picture it happening to anyone without them being completely changed forever and horrified. The Exorcist. I wish it had no sequels. Thanks for spending time with me. Please subscribe to Isaac's Haunted Beard on YouTube and follow Isaac's Haunted Beard on Twitter at Isaac'sHauntedB. Thank you. Bye-bye.